at 3:47 a.m., December 14, 1944. Private First Class Miguel Santos, 18 years old, crouched in a shallow spider hole carved into the muddy hillside overlooking the Cagayan Valley Road, watching 23 Imperial Japanese Army soldiers advance in staggered formation through the pre-dawn mist, now 200 meters away and closing, their Type 38 rifles glinting in the occasional moonlight that broke through the tobacco plantation's canopy. In his calloused hands, he gripped not a rifle or grenade, but a Y-shaped guava wood frame wrapped in salvaged rubber tire strips, loaded with a single 3-inch carpenter's nail he'd sharpened to a needlepoint on river stones for the past 6 hours. The nearest guerrilla support position sat 420 meters upslope behind him, too far to provide covering fire without revealing the entire ambush line prematurely. In exactly 90 seconds, the Japanese patrol would reach the kill zone marked by the fallen acacia tree, and either Santos would validate a theory that had made him the laughingstock of Colonel Fertig's Mindanao guerrillas for 3 months, or he would die trying to reload a child's toy while veteran soldiers with actual weapons watched in disbelief. This is the story of how observation beats assumption, how patience defeats doctrine, and how a dismissed teenager with a slingshot became the silent terror of the northern Luzon occupied zones, not because anyone believed in him, but because he believed in physics. The mist hung thick that December morning, the kind of suffocating tropical humidity that made every breath feel like drowning. Santos adjusted his position slightly, feeling the cold mud seep through his torn canvas trousers. He'd been in this hole since 11:30 p.m. the previous night, nearly 5 hours of absolute stillness, controlling his breathing, ignoring the mosquitoes that fed freely on his neck and arms. The Japanese patrol had left their garrison in Apari at 2:15 a.m. Intelligence reported via a sympathetic Filipino clerk who worked in their mess hall. 23 soldiers meant this wasn't a standard patrol. This was a hunter squad, specifically tasked with finding and destroying guerrilla positions that had been harassing supply convoys along Route 5. The Americans who'd organized the resistance network in northern Luzon had been clear about engagement protocols. Hit and run. Never commit to sustained firefights. Preserve ammunition at all costs. The guerrillas were perpetually undersupplied. Every bullet counted. Every grenade was precious. The standard-issue weapons were a patchwork of captured Japanese rifles, ancient Spanish-era Mausers, and the occasional American Springfield that had survived the fall of Bataan. Ammunition was so scarce that some guerrilla units had resorted to hand-loading cartridges with homemade gunpowder, which worked maybe 60% of the time, and sometimes just destroyed the rifle. Santos had arrived at the guerrilla camp 3 months earlier, in late September 1944. He'd walked 40 kilometers through Japanese-controlled territory, avoiding checkpoints, sleeping in rice paddies, eating whatever he could forage. He was from a small fishing village on the coast, San Vicente, population maybe 300 before the occupation. His father repaired fishing nets. His mother sold dried fish in the local market. Santos himself had worked as an apprentice carpenter, learning the trade from a Chinese immigrant named Lao Chen, who specialized in building the banca boats that dotted the coastline. He had no formal military training. He'd never held a rifle before September 1944. He certainly wasn't a natural leader or a strategic thinker. He was by every conventional measure completely unqualified to be part of a guerrilla resistance unit fighting against one of the most disciplined and effective armies in the Pacific theater. But Santos had something the others didn't: an obsessive attention to detail, born from 2 years of apprentice carpentry. Chen had been a demanding teacher, the kind who would make Santos sand the same plank of wood for 6 hours until the surface was perfectly smooth. "You see the grain?" Chen would say in his heavily accented Tagalog. "The wood tells you where it wants to go. You don't force, you observe. You work with nature, not against it." That philosophy had transferred unexpectedly to the guerrilla camp. While other recruits focused on learning marksmanship and small unit tactics, Santos found himself watching the way Japanese patrols moved through terrain. He observed how they positioned sentries. He noticed the timing of their supply convoys, always between 2 and 4 o'clock a.m., when exhaustion made guards less alert. He saw patterns where others saw chaos. The problem was ammunition. Colonel Wendell Fertig's guerrilla network in Mindanao had managed to establish some supply lines with American submarines, but northern Luzon was different. The Japanese presence was heavier here. The terrain was more accessible to their mechanized units. Submarine resupply was nearly impossible. Every guerrilla unit in Cagayan Valley was running on fumes. The unit commanders, mostly former Philippine Army officers, and a few American holdouts who'd refused to surrender, had been clear in their tactical briefings. "We can't afford to waste bullets on anything less than certain kills. If you can't guarantee a hit, don't take the shot. If you can't guarantee the patrol is isolated, don't engage." This conservative doctrine made tactical sense, but created a strategic problem. The guerrillas were becoming increasingly passive. Japanese patrols moved with growing confidence through supposedly hostile territory. Supply convoys ran unmolested. The psychological advantage was shifting. Santos had started experimenting with the Slingshot in early October. The idea hadn't come from any tactical manual or folk wisdom. It had come from watching children in the villages play with tirador, simple Y-shaped branch slingshots they used to hunt birds and rats. The kids were remarkably accurate. A skilled 12-year-old could hit a sparrow at 30 meters. Santos had watched one boy, maybe 11 years old, consistently knock mangoes off a tree at 45 meters, calculating the arc perfectly to account for gravity drop. The physics made sense. A slingshot was essentially a simple energy storage and release system. The rubber band stored elastic potential energy when drawn back. Release that energy efficiently, and you could accelerate a small projectile to significant velocities. The question was whether you could make it lethal. Santos started small. He carved a basic slingshot from guava wood. The Y-frame needed to be strong but light, and guava had the right combination of hardness and flexibility. For the rubber, he used strips cut from old tire inner tubes, scavenged from the burned-out Japanese trucks along the mountain roads. The ammunition was the tricky part. Stones were too irregular. They flew unpredictably. Bullets were too precious to waste on experiments. Then Santos remembered the carpenter's nails in his pack. He'd brought a small bundle from Chen's workshop, thinking they might be useful for repairs. 3-inch nails, heavy-gauge steel. If he sharpened the tips properly, they became miniature arrows. The first tests were discouraging. The nails tumbled in flight, hitting sideways maybe 70% of the time. No penetration, no lethality. Santos spent 2 weeks modifying the design. He wrapped the rear of each nail with thin cord to create stabilizing fins, the same principle as fletching on an arrow. The improvement was dramatic. The nails flew straight, point first, at ranges up to 50 meters. But accuracy was still the problem. A slingshot wasn't like aiming a rifle. There were no sights, no scope, no reference points. It was purely instinctive shooting, requiring the brain to calculate trajectory, windage, and drop instantly. Santos started practicing 6 hours a day. He set up targets at various distances, coconuts, wooden posts, anything with a clear aiming point. He practiced until his hands blistered, then practiced through the pain until the blisters hardened into calluses. By November, he could consistently hit a coconut-sized target at 40 meters. By late November, he was hitting at 60 meters. The mechanics became automatic: draw, anchor, release. His brain calculated the arc without conscious thought. The mockery started when other guerrillas noticed what he was doing. Lieutenant Reyes, the unit's second-in-command, had been particularly dismissive. "Santos, what the hell are you doing with that toy?" "Practicing, sir?" "Practicing for what? Are we fighting school children now?" The other guerrillas laughed. Some of them called him Tirador Boy, or the marksman, with heavy sarcasm. Even the sympathetic ones, guys like Corporal Domingo, who'd been friendly when Santos first arrived, thought it was a waste of time. "Miguel, I get that ammunition is scarce," Domingo had said one evening. "But a slingshot? Come on, brother. This isn't David and Goliath. The Japanese have machine guns. They have grenades. They have artillery. What are you going to do, piss them off with a nail?" Santos didn't argue. He just kept practicing. He understood why they dismissed him. On paper, it was absurd. The Japanese soldier was equipped with a 6.5mm Type 38 rifle with an effective range of 460 meters, a bayonet, typically 2 grenades, and sometimes a Type 14 pistol. He wore a steel helmet and carried 40 to 60 rounds of ammunition. The idea that an 18-year-old with a slingshot posed any meaningful threat seemed like childish fantasy. But Santos had done the math. A 3-inch carpenter's nail weighed approximately 3.8 grams. With the improved slingshot design and maximum draw length, he could achieve a muzzle velocity of roughly 65 to 70 meters per second. That translated to about 8 to 9 joules of kinetic energy at release. Not much compared to a rifle bullet's 2,000 plus joules, but more than sufficient for penetration at close range if the target was unarmored. The human skull, Santos had learned from a medical textbook in the guerrilla camp's small library, varied in thickness but averaged about 6 to 7 millimeters. The orbital cavity, the eye socket, was much thinner, essentially just bone-protecting soft tissue. A sharpened steel nail traveling at 65 meters per second would penetrate an eye with no difficulty. It would penetrate exposed neck arteries. It would penetrate the ear canal. The lethality wasn't in the kinetic energy. It was in the precision targeting of vulnerable anatomy. The problem was proving it. The guerrilla commanders weren't going to authorize an operation based on an untested theory from an 18-year-old carpenter's apprentice with no combat experience. Santos needed a real-world demonstration, and that meant waiting for the right opportunity. By December 1944, the Japanese occupation of the Philippines had become increasingly desperate, but no less brutal. General Tomoyuki Yamashita's 14th Area Army controlled most of Luzon. But American forces under General MacArthur were preparing for the liberation campaign. The Japanese knew it was coming. They could read the strategic writing on the wall. This knowledge made them more, not less, dangerous. Yamashita had ordered a defensive strategy, focused on bleeding the Americans during the inevitable invasion. That meant fortifying the mountain regions, stockpiling supplies, and most critically, eliminating the guerrilla networks that could provide intelligence and support to American forces. The Japanese counterinsurgency operations in late 1944 were methodical and savage. They employed the three-alls policy: kill all, burn all, loot all in suspected guerrilla areas. Villages that supported resistance fighters were destroyed, populations massacred or deported to labor camps. The Kempeitai, the military police, operated networks of informants and collaborators, offering rice and protection to Filipinos who betrayed resistance positions. The Japanese patrol that Santos was watching that December morning was part of this intensified campaign. 23 soldiers was an unusually large formation for a patrol. Typically, the Japanese used squad-sized elements of 8 to 12 men. This was a deliberate hunter-killer team, probably led by an experienced sergeant or junior officer, who'd been tasked with locating and destroying the guerrilla base that had been hitting convoys in the Cagayan Valley. Intelligence reports, gathered from sympathetic Filipinos who worked in Japanese-controlled areas, suggested the patrol was commanded by Sergeant Takeshi Nakamura, a veteran of the China campaigns who'd earned a reputation for ruthless efficiency. Nakamura was known for his tactical patience. Unlike some Japanese commanders who'd grown frustrated with guerrilla warfare and resorted to blunt force, Nakamura understood that you couldn't fight insurgents by marching in straight lines. He varied his routes. He changed his timing. He used bait and ambush tactics. The guerrilla units had learned to respect Nakamura's patrols. 6 guerrillas had been killed in the past month, all in engagements with units under his command. He was the kind of professional soldier who made resistance work extremely dangerous. Colonel Fertig's intelligence network had intercepted information about this particular patrol through a combination of human intelligence and pattern analysis. The Japanese garrison in Apari had been preparing for something: increased supply stockpiling, unusual meetings between officers, heightened patrol activity. The assessment was that Nakamura had finally located the general area of the guerrilla base and was conducting a reconnaissance in force to pinpoint its exact position. The guerrilla response had been carefully calculated. They couldn't avoid the patrol. Running would only confirm they had something to hide in this area, and Nakamura would bring back a larger force. They couldn't engage in a conventional firefight. Ammunition was too scarce, and even if they won, the gunfire would bring reinforcements. The solution was an ambush designed to look like an accident or a random attack by bandits rather than organized resistance. And the ambush site had been chosen specifically for its tactical advantages. The road passed through a slight depression where the tobacco plantation's old drainage system had created a natural funnel. Dense vegetation on both sides limited visibility and escape routes. Most importantly, there was a massive fallen acacia tree across part of the road, storm damage from 2 weeks earlier, that the Japanese hadn't bothered to clear. Patrols had been detouring around it, which meant there was a predictable choke point. The plan was simple. Let the patrol bunch up near the fallen tree, then hit them with a concentrated volley from the elevated positions on both sides of the road. The guerrillas had 12 shooters in position, 6 on each side, armed with a mix of rifles and one precious Thompson submachine gun. They'd calculated that with surprise and advantageous positioning, they could kill or wound maybe 8 to 10 of the patrol members in the first volley. The survivors would scatter, and the guerrillas would withdraw before Japanese reinforcements could arrive from Apari, 32 kilometers to the north. It was a reasonable plan. It would work if everything went perfectly. But Santos knew that nothing in combat ever went perfectly. The fundamental problem was ammunition discipline. The guerrillas had 47 rifle rounds total among the 12 shooters, plus 3 30-round magazines for the Thompson, though one magazine was damaged and jammed after about 15 rounds. If the ambush went according to plan, they'd expend maybe 30 rounds total. That left 17 rounds as reserve, which was cutting it uncomfortably close. More concerning was the question of what happened if the first volley didn't break the patrol. Japanese infantry doctrine emphasized immediate aggressive counterattack when ambushed. If 8 or 9 soldiers survived the initial volley relatively unscathed, they'd charge the guerrilla positions rather than retreat. And if that happened, the guerrillas would face a close quarters battle where their ammunition advantage evaporated quickly. Lieutenant Reyes had briefed the shooters clearly. First volley has to count. Aim for center mass on the soldiers closest to the tree. No fancy headshots, no hero bullshit. Just good solid hits. If we drop 8 in the first 3 seconds, the rest will break. If we only drop 4 or 5, we're going to have a problem. Santos wasn't part of the primary ambush line. He'd been positioned in the forward observation post, the spider hole he now occupied, primarily as an early warning element. His job was to confirm the patrol's arrival, count the exact number of soldiers, and signal back to Reyes when they were in the kill zone. He had not mentioned the slingshot to Reyes. He'd simply brought it with him, along with 12 carefully prepared nails, thinking that if an opportunity presented itself, he'd take it. Not as part of the official plan, not as a sanctioned tactic, just as his own private experiment. Now, watching the Japanese patrol advance through the mist, Santos ran through the calculations one final time. The patrol was moving in 2 staggered columns, maintaining about 3 meters between soldiers. Standard Japanese infantry spacing, designed to minimize casualties from artillery or machine gun fire. Nakamura, easy to identify by the officer's sword at his hip and the map case across his chest, was positioned in the middle of the formation, which was smart. It meant he was protected by soldiers in front and behind, and could command the patrol from a central position. The nearest soldier was about 180 meters away now. In approximately 60 seconds, they'd reach the fallen acacia tree. Santos had maybe a 10 to 15-second window, where the patrol would be maximally bunched up at the choke point before they spread out again on the other side. He checked the slingshot. The Y-frame felt solid in his left hand. The rubber bands showed no signs of degradation. He'd tested them extensively. The nail was loaded in the leather pouch. Point forward. Stabilizing cord wrapped tight. His hands were steady despite the adrenaline. The tactical reality was this. If he took a shot with the slingshot before the ambush volley, he'd reveal his position. The spider hole was well camouflaged, but a slingshot only worked at relatively close range, which meant he'd have to let the patrol get within 50 to 60 meters. That was danger close. One burst of return fire, and he'd be cut to pieces in the shallow hole. But if he didn't take the shot, if he just did his job as forward observer and let the ambush play out, he'd never prove the concept. He'd remain Tirador Boy, the subject of jokes and dismissive laughter. More importantly, if the slingshot actually worked as lethal silent weapon, the guerrillas were missing a tactical advantage they desperately needed. Santos had made his decision 3 hours ago, during the long wait in the darkness. He was going to take the shot. Not to prove anything to Reyes or the others. Not for recognition or glory. But because the math worked. And sometimes you had to trust the math even when everyone else thought you were crazy. The patrol was at 120 meters. The lead soldiers were clearly visible now in the strengthening pre-dawn light. They looked tired, moving with the heavy fatigue of men who'd been walking for hours through difficult terrain. That was good. Fatigue degraded alertness, degraded reaction time. At 90 meters, Santos could see individual details. The lead soldier was young, maybe early 20s, carrying his Type 38 at low ready, sweeping his gaze across the vegetation on both sides of the road, but not looking up at the hillside where the spider holes were positioned. The second soldier was older, thicker in the torso, breathing heavily through his mouth. 60 meters. Santos slowly shifted his position, raising himself just slightly to get a clear line of sight. The movement was glacial, millimeter by millimeter, keeping the vegetation in front of the hole as concealment. His heart was hammering, but his hands remained steady. Years of carpentry had taught him stillness, the ability to hold a chisel at precisely the right angle for extended periods, waiting for the exact moment to apply pressure. 45 meters. The lead soldier was now close enough that Santos could see the stubble on his face, the dirt stains on his uniform, the small tears in his canvas gaiters. The man's helmet sat slightly crooked on his head. His eyes were scanning, but with a mechanical quality that suggested routine rather than genuine alertness. Santos drew the slingshot. Slow, controlled, bringing the rubber bands back to full extension. The tension was immense. Roughly 40 pounds of draw weight at full extension. He anchored the draw at the corner of his mouth, a consistent reference point he'd practiced thousands of times. The Y-frame was rock steady in his left hand, target selection. The lead soldier was the tactically obvious choice. Drop him, and you create an immediate obstacle for the formation. But Santos looked past him, scanning for a better target. There. The fifth soldier, in the left column. Not the leader, not particularly distinctive, but positioned perfectly. He was walking with his rifle slung over his shoulder, both hands free, completely relaxed. More importantly, he was slightly separated from the soldiers around him, about 4 meters behind the fourth soldier, 5 meters ahead of the sixth. If that soldier went down suddenly and silently, the soldiers ahead wouldn't notice immediately. The soldiers behind might see him fall, but wouldn't understand what happened. The confusion would buy crucial seconds. Santos shifted his aim, tracking the target. The man was 42 meters away, walking at roughly 1 meter per second, moving from left to right relative to Santos's position. The ballistic calculation was automatic now, his brain computing the lead angle, the elevation to account for gravity drop, the deflection for the light breeze moving through the valley, 30 meters. The patrol was entering the kill zone now. Any second, Reyes would give the signal for the ambush volley. Santos had maybe 10 seconds. He breathed out slowly, letting half his air out, holding the rest. The slingshot draw was locked at anchor. His left arm was fully extended, perfectly aligned. His eyes were focused on the target's head, specifically the temple region, where the skull was thinnest, 25 meters. The fifth soldier turned his head slightly, looking at something in the vegetation to his right. The movement exposed his temple perfectly. Santos released. The mechanics of the shot were instantaneous, but felt like slow motion. The rubber band snapped forward with a sharp crack, much quieter than a gunshot, but not silent. The nail launched from the pouch, accelerating from 0 to roughly 68 meters per second in less than 20 centimeters. The stabilizing cord kept the projectile point forward. The flight time was approximately 0.6 seconds. The nail hit the soldier just above and slightly forward of the left ear, penetrating the temporal bone at a shallow angle and driving approximately 4 centimeters into the temporal lobe of the brain. The effect was not immediately dramatic. The soldier didn't cry out. He didn't clutch his head. He simply stopped walking, stood still for perhaps 2 seconds with a confused expression on his face, then collapsed forward onto the road, completely limp. The soldiers ahead of him didn't notice. They were focused on the terrain ahead, watching the fallen acacia tree, not looking back at their formation. But the sixth soldier, about 5 meters behind the fallen man, saw him go down. Santos watched the confusion played across the man's face. He stopped walking, stared at his collapsed comrade, started to call out something. Then the ambush volley erupted. 12 rifles firing simultaneously from elevated positions on both sides of the road created a thunderous roar that shattered the pre-dawn quiet. The noise was overwhelming. Not the crack, crack, crack of individual shots, but a merged explosion of sound that echoed off the hillsides and rolled across the valley. The Thompson submachine gun added its distinctive rapid hammering, 30 rounds in less than 3 seconds. The Japanese patrol disintegrated. 8 soldiers went down in the first volley, 5 clearly dead, 3 wounded and thrashing. The remaining soldiers scattered, some diving for cover behind the fallen acacia tree, others breaking left and right into the vegetation, 1 or 2 freezing in place with the shocked immobility of men whose brains had temporarily stopped processing information. Sergeant Nakamura was not among the casualties. He'd been positioned in the middle of the formation, and by pure chance, none of the ambush shooters had targeted him directly in the first volley. Santos watched him react with the instant aggressive response of a veteran soldier. Nakamura didn't run, didn't freeze. He immediately started shouting orders in Japanese, rallying the survivors, directing them to form a defensive position using the fallen tree as cover. 10 Japanese soldiers remained combat effective. That was the nightmare scenario Reyes had feared, and other survivors to mount an organized counterattack. But not so many casualties that the patrol broke and ran. Santos could hear Reyes shouting commands up the hill. "Controlled fire! Pick your targets! Make the rounds count!" The guerrillas continued firing, but now it was individual aimed shots rather than a massed volley. The problem was that the surviving Japanese soldiers had found good cover and were beginning to return fire. The distinctive crack of Type 38 rifles echoed through the valley. Santos saw dirt and bark exploding from the hillside where the guerrilla positions were located, as Japanese rounds searched for targets. This was deteriorating into exactly the kind of sustained engagement the guerrillas couldn't afford. Ammunition was burning at a catastrophic rate. Worse, the gunfire would be audible for kilometers. Japanese reinforcements from Apari would be mobilizing right now. The guerrillas had maybe 10 minutes before they were caught between the patrol remnants and fresh troops arriving from the north. Santos reloaded the slingshot. Another 3-inch nail, freshly sharpened, stabilizing cord tight. The Japanese survivors were approximately 50 meters away now, clustered behind the fallen acacia tree. From Santos's elevated angle, he could see portions of their bodies. A helmet here, an exposed shoulder there, a soldier's legs visible beneath the tree trunk. But more interestingly, he could see Nakamura. The sergeant was positioned in the center of the defensive cluster, partially concealed but still visible from Santos's angle. He was the command element. He was keeping the survivors organized, preventing panic, directing their return fire. If Nakamura went down, the defensive cohesion would collapse. The range was extreme for the slingshot, nearly 50 meters with an angled shot. Santos had practiced at this distance, but his accuracy dropped significantly beyond 45 meters. Maybe 50% hit rate at this range, and that was against stationary targets, not combat conditions. But there was no choice. If the engagement continued, the guerrillas would either run out of ammunition or get pinned down by reinforcements. The ambush had failed to break the patrol. They needed something to tip the tactical balance. Santos drew the slingshot again. Full extension. Anchor point at his jaw. The elevation was critical here. At 50 meters, gravity drop would be significant. He had to aim approximately 2 meters above the target to account for the ballistic arc. Nakamura was partially concealed behind a soldier crouched in front of him. Only his head and upper shoulders were visible. Santos focused on the head, specifically the helmet. The Japanese Type 90 steel helmet was good protection against shrapnel and glancing blows, but it wasn't designed to stop a direct pointed impact. More importantly, the helmet sat loosely on the head, secured only by a cloth strap. A sharp impact to the helmet would transfer significant force to the skull beneath. Santos adjusted his aim, tracking Nakamura's movements. The sergeant was shouting orders, gesturing with his left hand, completely unaware that someone was aiming at him from 48 meters away with a slingshot. Release. The nail arced through the air, a tiny, glittering projectile, barely visible against the pre-dawn sky. The flight time was nearly a full second. Santos watched the trajectory, his brain automatically calculating whether the aim was true. The nail struck Nakamura's helmet on the left side, roughly above the ear, at a steep descending angle. The helmet rang like a struck bell. The nail didn't penetrate the steel, but the impact transferred approximately 7 joules of kinetic energy directly to Nakamura's skull through the thin leather suspension system inside the helmet. It wasn't enough force to fracture the skull, but it was more than enough to cause a severe concussive impact. Nakamura's head snapped sideways from the blow. He staggered, dropped to one knee, then collapsed completely unconscious. The effect on the Japanese defensive position was immediate. The soldiers had been looking to Nakamura for orders, for direction, for leadership. When he suddenly collapsed without any visible cause, no gunshot, no explosion, just a strange ringing sound and their sergeant dropping like a puppet with cut strings. The confusion was absolute. One soldier started shouting, "Nakamura dono," trying to rouse the sergeant. Another soldier looked around frantically, trying to understand what had happened. The organized return fire faltered, then stopped completely as the survivors focused on their fallen leader. That 3-second window of confusion was all the guerrillas needed. Reyes, seeing the Japanese defensive cohesion collapse, shouted the withdrawal order, "Break contact, fall back, go, go, go!" The guerrillas extracted from their positions in practiced fashion, moving up the hillside in pairs, using cover and concealment, withdrawing deeper into the forested terrain where the Japanese couldn't follow without risking further ambushes. The surviving Japanese soldiers, leaderless and demoralized, didn't attempt to pursue. They focused on treating their wounded and attempting to revive Nakamura. Santos abandoned the spider hole, moving at a fast crouch up the hillside, following the withdrawal route he'd memorized during the pre-ambush planning. Behind him, he could hear scattered Japanese voices shouting, but no organized pursuit. The guerrilla rendezvous point was 420 meters from the ambush site, in a dense bamboo grove where the terrain became too steep for easy pursuit. Santos reached it 6 minutes after the first shot was fired. Most of the ambush team was already there, breathing heavily, checking their weapons, doing the mental calculus of ammunition remaining. Corporal Domingo grabbed Santos by the shoulder. "Did you see what happened to their sergeant? 1 second he was shouting orders. The next he just dropped. I thought someone got a headshot, but there was no impact, no blood. It was like he had a stroke or something." Santos said nothing. He was carefully wrapping the slingshot in an oiled cloth, securing it in his pack. Domingo stared at him for a moment. Then his eyes went wide. "Miguel? No, you didn't." "Didn't what?" "The slingshot. You actually... Holy shit. You actually hit him with that thing?" Lieutenant Reyes overheard the conversation and turned. "What are you two talking about?" Domingo pointed at Santos. "He's been practicing with a slingshot for the past 3 months, the one we all mocked him for. I think he just took out the Japanese sergeant with it." Reyes stared at Santos with an expression somewhere between disbelief and fury. "You took an unauthorized shot during a planned ambush?" "Santos, what the hell were you thinking?" "Sir, I observed an opportunity and exploited it. The sergeant was the command element. Removing him from the battle space degraded Japanese tactical cohesion and enabled our successful withdrawal." The formal military language sounded absurd, coming from an 18-year-old carpenter's apprentice, and several of the guerrillas laughed despite the tension. But Reyes wasn't laughing. "Santos, you got lucky, extremely lucky. If that shot had missed, if it had made noise, if it had revealed your position before the ambush volley, you understand you could have compromised the entire operation." "Yes, sir. I calculated the risk and determined it was acceptable." "You calculated..." Reyes stopped, visibly controlling his anger. "We'll discuss this later. Right now, we move. Japanese reinforcements will be here in 20 minutes. Let's go." The guerrilla unit reached their base camp, a hidden complex of bamboo huts and camouflaged positions deep in the mountain forest, at 7:30 a.m., nearly 4 hours after the ambush. The immediate tactical assessment was mixed. Confirmed kills: 8 Japanese soldiers dead at the ambush site, possibly 2 more who died from wounds during their retreat. That was a significant tactical success. Nearly 50% casualties on a 23-man patrol. But the cost had been steep. The guerrillas had expended 38 of their 47 rifle rounds, plus 2 full Thompson magazines. They were now dangerously low on ammunition. Not enough for another engagement of similar intensity. More concerning was the strategic implication. The ambush hadn't looked like a random attack. It had been too well coordinated, too professionally executed. The Japanese would know they were dealing with an organized guerrilla unit, not bandits or scattered resistance. That meant increased patrols, more aggressive sweeps, possibly a large-scale operation to find and destroy the base. Colonel Fertig, actually a former American mining engineer, who'd taken the rank colonel because the Filipino guerrillas needed to believe they were led by a high-ranking officer, held the after-action review in the command hut at 9 a.m. "Gentlemen, that could have gone better. We hurt them, but we didn't break them. And now, they know we're here. We're going to have to relocate the base within 48 hours, which means abandoning supplies and equipment we can't carry." Reyes stood. "Sir, I need to report an unusual development during the engagement." He proceeded to describe Santos's slingshot shots, including the apparently successful strike on Nakamura that had broken the Japanese defensive coordination. The room went silent. Every eye turned to Santos, who sat quietly in the back of the hut, trying to remain invisible. Fertig studied Santos for a long moment. "Private Santos, stand up." Santos rose, acutely aware of every guerrilla fighter in the room, watching him. "Did you, in fact, strike a Japanese sergeant with a slingshot at approximately 50 meters range during combat operations?" "Yes, sir. The projectile was a 3-inch sharpened carpenter's nail. In impact was to the left temporal region of the target's helmet. The target was rendered unconscious, degrading enemy command cohesion at a critical moment. And you took this shot without authorization from Lieutenant Reyes?" "Yes, sir. I observed an opportunity and made a tactical decision." Several of the guerrillas laughed. The idea of a teenager making tactical decisions with a slingshot was still absurd to most of them. But Fertig wasn't laughing. "Private Santos, show me this weapon." Santos retrieved the slingshot from his pack, along with 3 remaining prepared nails. He demonstrated the construction: the guava wood Y-frame, the rubber inner tube bands, the stabilizing cord on the nails. Fertig examined everything carefully, asking detailed questions about draw weight, effective range, accuracy rates. "You claim 50 meters effective range. Prove it." 15 minutes later, Santos stood in the cleared area behind the command hut, demonstrating the slingshot for the assembled guerrilla unit. Fertig had set up targets, coconuts placed on bamboo stakes at various distances. 20 meters, 35 meters, 50 meters. Santos hit all 3 targets in succession. The 50-meter shot took him 2 attempts. The first nail missed by about 30 centimeters, impacting the bamboo stake. The second nail punched clean through the coconut with a satisfying crack. Fertig picked up the fallen coconut, examining the entry hole. The nail had penetrated completely through the tough outer husk and the hard inner shell, exiting the other side. He looked at Santos with new respect. "Effective, silent. Uses materials we can scavenge anywhere." "How many nails do you have?" "Currently, sir, 6 prepared rounds. But I can make more. Any 3-inch steel nail mal will work. The preparation takes about 30 minutes per round, sharpening the point, wrapping the stabilizing cord." "What's your accuracy rate?" "At 40 meters or less, approximately 90% against stationary targets, 70% against moving targets. Beyond 40 meters, accuracy decreases significantly." Fertig nodded slowly. "Silent kills at 40 meters. That changes things. Lieutenant Reyes, how many slingshots could we manufacture with available materials?" Reyes, who'd been watching the demonstration with increasing interest, calculated quickly. We have plenty of wood. Rubber inner tubes may be enough for 6 to 8 units if we scavenge from the burned vehicles on Route 5. The limiting factor would be finding people who can actually shoot the damn things accurately. Private Santos, how long did it take you to achieve your current proficiency? 3 months of daily practice, sir. 6 to 8 hours per day. But that was developing the technique from scratch. With proper instruction, I estimate a motivated individual could reach combat-effective accuracy in 4 to 6 weeks. Corporal Domingo spoke up. Colonel, I'd like to volunteer for training. If Santos can teach this, I want to learn it. 3 other guerrillas raised their hands, then 5 more. Within minutes, nearly half the unit had volunteered to learn slingshot marksmanship. Fertig smiled, the first genuine smile Santos had seen from him. Gentlemen, I think we've just invented a new tactical capability. Private Santos, you're now in charge of slingshot development and training. I want a full training program operational within 1 week. I want at least 4 combat qualified slingshot operators within 1 month. And I want a tactical doctrine for how we employ these weapons in future operations. Yes, sir. One more thing, Santos. What you did this morning, taking that unauthorized shot, was tactically sound, but procedurally unacceptable. In a conventional military unit, I'd have you court-martialed for disobeying orders. But this isn't a conventional unit. And these aren't conventional circumstances. Sometimes the tactical situation requires initiative beyond the plan. Just make damn sure your initiative works, because if it doesn't, people die. Understood? Understood, sir. Over the following weeks, Santos transformed from dismissed teenager to unlikely tactical innovator. The slingshot program, initially viewed with skepticism by many guerrillas, became a serious training priority as word spread about the ambush on December 14th. The tactical advantages became increasingly clear. Silence. A slingshot made a sharp snap when fired, but the sound was nothing like a gunshot. It didn't echo across valleys. It didn't alert enemy positions kilometers away. In dense jungle terrain, the sound was nearly indistinguishable from branches breaking or other natural noises. Ammunition availability. Bullets were precious, requiring complex supply chains and risking interdiction during smuggling. Slingshot ammunition was everywhere. Nails, ball bearings, small stones, even carved wooden projectiles. The guerrillas could manufacture hundreds of rounds using materials scavenged from destroyed vehicles, abandoned buildings, or local workshops. Psychological impact. Japanese soldiers were trained to respond to gunfire. They understood the tactical language of rifles, machine guns, grenades. But soldiers dropping silently, with nails through their skulls. That was outside their tactical experience. It created confusion, fear, uncertainty. Conservation of firearm ammunition. Every kill achieved with a slingshot was a kill that didn't consume a precious rifle round. In a resource-constrained guerrilla campaign, that mathematics mattered enormously. Santos developed a formal training program structured around 4 phases. Phase 1. Fundamentals. Week 1. Students learned basic slingshot construction, draw mechanics, anchor points, and release technique. They practiced against large, stationary targets at 10 meters, focusing purely on consistency of form. Phase 2. Accuracy development. Weeks 2 to 3. progressive distance training from 10 to 40 meters. Students fired hundreds of practice rounds daily, developing the instinctive ballistic calculations required for accurate shooting. Phase 3, Combat Application. Week 4, Moving Targets, Rapid Target Acquisition, Shooting from Awkward Positions, Stress Inoculation through Timed Exercises. Phase 4, Tactical Integration. Week 5 to 6, Field Exercises combining slingshots with conventional weapons, developing specific tactical doctrines for ambush, reconnaissance, and close quarters situations. The training was grueling. Domingo, who'd volunteered enthusiastically, nearly quit after the first week when his hands developed massive blisters from the constant draw and release. Santos showed him how to wrap his hands, how to build calluses gradually, how to manage the pain. "Brother, I don't know how you did this for 3 months straight," Domingo said one evening, soaking his bleeding hands in salt water. "I didn't know any better," Santos replied. "I just thought it would work, so I kept practicing until it did." By mid-January 1945, Santos had 4 students who'd achieved combat effective proficiency, defined as 70% accuracy at 35 meters against stationary targets and 50% accuracy against moving targets. Corporal Domingo was the star student, actually surpassing Santos's accuracy at distances beyond 40 meters. 2 younger guerrillas, teenagers like Shads, ages 16 and 17, proved the natural shots, picking up the technique with alarming speed. The tactical doctrine Santos developed emphasized the slingshot as a specialized tool, not a replacement for firearms. Scenario 1. Silent Sentry Elimination. Guerrilla scouts armed with slingshots could eliminate isolated Japanese sentries without alerting nearby positions, enabling deeper reconnaissance penetrations. Scenario 2. Ambush Enhancement. Slingshot operators positioned forward of the main ambush line could eliminate key targets, officers, radio operators, machine gunners, and before the main engagement, degrading enemy response capabilities. Scenario 3. Ammunition Conservation. In low-intensity engagements where firearms would be overkill or too loud, slingshots provided a viable alternative. Scenario 4. Urban Operations. In populated areas where gunfire would endanger civilians or alert Japanese garrisons, slingshots enabled targeted eliminations with minimal collateral risk. Colonel Fertig approved the doctrine with one critical addition. Every slingshot operator must also be proficient with conventional firearms. The slingshot is a tactical multiplier, not a crutch. If the situation requires a rifle, you grab a rifle. Clear? Clear, sir. The first real-world test of the expanded slingshot program came on January 28, 1945. Intelligence reported a Japanese supply convoy moving through the Cagayan Valley. 3 trucks, escorted by 8 soldiers. The convoy was transporting ammunition and medical supplies to an isolated garrison in the mountains, supplies the guerrillas desperately needed to capture. The tactical problem was location. The convoy route passed through several small villages. A conventional ambush with gunfire would endanger civilians and invite brutal Japanese reprisals. Fertig wanted the supplies, but not at the cost of civilian massacres. Santos proposed an alternative, a silent assault using slingshot operators to eliminate the guards before they could raise an alarm, followed by a rapid capture of the trucks. The plan was audacious. It required 4 slingshot operators to achieve 4 kills simultaneously from concealed positions, followed by immediate close assault by conventional guerrillas to secure the vehicles before the drivers could escape. Failure at any point would result in a firefight that exposed the civilian population to danger. Fertig approved the mission with severe reservations. this goes wrong, if civilians die because your slingshots weren't quiet enough or fast enough, I'm holding you personally responsible. Understood. Understood, sir. The ambush site was chosen carefully. A stretch of road passing through a tobacco field, far enough from the nearest village that any firefight wouldn't immediately endanger civilians, but close enough that the guerrillas could withdraw into the populated areas for concealment if necessary. Santos positioned his 4 slingshot operators in a line parallel to the road, spaced approximately 15 meters apart. Each operator had a designated target. The plan was simple. When the convoy halted, which it would, because the guerrillas had placed a convincing broken cart obstacle in the road, the guards would dismount to clear the obstacle. At that point, 4 slingshots would fire simultaneously, eliminating 4 guards. The remaining 4 guards and 3 drivers would be captured or killed in the immediate follow-up assault. The convoy arrived at 2:35 p.m., exactly on schedule. 3 Isuzu Type 94 trucks, canvas-covered cargo beds, 8 soldiers riding on the running boards and tailgates. The lead truck's driver spotted the broken cart obstacle and stopped. The soldiers dismounted, weapons slung, approaching the cart to move it off the road. Santos, positioned in a shallow depression 30 meters from the road, tracked his designated target, a soldier on the left side of the formation, standing with his back partially turned, smoking a cigarette. Range 28 meters. Wind negligible. Clear shot. He'd synchronized the strike using a simple hand signal system. When all 4 slingshot operators had their targets acquired and were ready to fire, they'd raise their left hand. When all 4 hands were visible, Santos would lower his hand, and all 4 would fire simultaneously. He waited. Corporal Domingo, positioned to his right, raised his hand. Target acquired. The 16-year-old guerrilla, to Santos's left, raised his hand. The 4th operator, a fisherman named Garcia, raised his hand. 4 hands up. All targets acquired. Santos lowered his hand. 4 slingshots released simultaneously. 4 sharp cracks, barely audible over the ambient noise of the idling truck engines. 4 sharpened nails flew across 28 to 35 meters of open air. 3 hits, 1 miss. Santos's target dropped instantly, the nail penetrating his right temple and killing him before he hit the ground. Domingo's target staggered backward, clutching at the nail embedded in his throat, blood spurting between his fingers. Garcia's target collapsed without a sound, hit in the base of the skull. The 16-year-old's shot missed. The nail passed over his target's shoulder by centimeters, impacting a tree behind the convoy. The surviving soldiers reacted with confusion rather than alarm. 3 of their comrades had suddenly collapsed. But there'd been no gunshots, no visible attack. They stared at the bodies, trying to process what had happened. That 3-second delay was fatal. The guerrilla assault team emerged from concealment on the opposite side of the road, weapons leveled. "Hands up! Drop your weapons, now!" The surviving soldiers, outnumbered and confused, surrendered immediately. The entire engagement lasted less than 20 seconds from first shot to convoy capture. 0 civilian casualties, 0 guerrilla casualties, 3 enemy dead, 5 captured, 3 trucks of supplies secured. It was a perfect demonstration of the tactical doctrine Santos had developed. And it changed everything. Word of the January 28th ambush spread rapidly through the guerrilla network in northern Luzon. Other resistance units requested information about the Slingshot program. Colonel Fertig, recognizing the broader strategic value, authorized Santos to travel to neighboring guerrilla bases to demonstrate the technique and train additional operators. Over the following months, February through April 1945, Santos became an unlikely traveling instructor, moving between guerrilla camps, teaching the slingshot methodology to dozens of fighters. Each camp he visited had initially regarded him with skepticism. An 18-year-old with a toy weapon? But the demonstrations were always convincing, and the tactical logic was irrefutable. By March 1945, an estimated 40 to 50 slingshot-qualified operators were active across the northern Luzon resistance network. The Japanese began to notice a disturbing pattern. Soldiers were dying silently, with no gunshot wounds, often with small metallic objects embedded in their skulls or necks. Intelligence reports captured from Japanese positions showed increasing fear and confusion among the occupation troops. One captured document, translated by guerrilla intelligence, revealed the Japanese psychological reaction. Soldiers report unknown silent weapons being employed by insurgents. Victims found with steel fragments in fatal wounds, but no explosion or gunfire heard. Possible new American weapon. Request urgent intelligence assessment and countermeasures. The Japanese never figured out they were being killed by slingshots. The idea was too absurd, too far outside their tactical framework. They theorized silenced firearms, specialized crossbows, even booby traps. But not slingshots. Santos himself participated in 14 engagements between December 1944 and the liberation of Luzon in mid-1945. He achieved 11 confirmed kills with the slingshot, plus an unknown number of combat-degrading hits, wounded enemies, psychological casualties. His longest successful shot was 53 meters, a Japanese radio operator eliminated during a reconnaissance patrol. But the real measure of success wasn't Santos's personal kill count. It was the tactical shift across the guerrilla network. Slingshots became a standard component of resistance operations. Ammunition expenditure decreased. Silent operations increased. Japanese counter-guerrilla effectiveness declined as their soldiers grew increasingly fearful of an enemy that could kill without warning, without sound, without apparent weapon. The final vindication came in late April 1945. General MacArthur's forces had liberated most of Luzon. The Japanese were retreating into the mountains for a final desperate stand. Colonel Fertig's guerrilla network was operating openly now, coordinating with American forces, providing intelligence and direct combat support. A U.S. Army intelligence officer, Captain James Richardson, attached to the 6th Army, visited Fertig's headquarters to debrief the guerrilla operations. During the debriefing, Santos demonstrated the slingshot for Richardson and several other American officers. Richardson's reaction was initially disbelief, then professional interest. "Private Santos, are you telling me you've been killing Japanese soldiers with a slingshot for the past 4 months?" "Yes, sir. 11 confirmed kills plus combat-degrading hits." "And you've trained approximately 50 other guerrilla fighters in this technique?" 47, sir, plus instructors who've trained additional students." Richardson examined one of the prepared nails, testing the sharpness, feeling the weight. "This is going in my after-action report. This is the kind of unconventional warfare innovation that wins insurgencies. Low-tech, high-impact, adaptable to local conditions." One of the other American officers, a lieutenant who'd spent the entire war in conventional infantry units, was less impressed. "Sir, with respect, this is a novelty, maybe useful in specific circumstances, but you can't seriously compare a slingshot to a rifle." Santos spoke quietly. "Lieutenant, a rifle is superior in almost every measurable way: range, stopping power, rate of fire. But a rifle requires ammunition that must be manufactured, transported, and distributed through supply chains. The enemy can interdict. A rifle makes noise that reveals your position and alerts enemy forces kilometers away. A rifle cannot be improvised from materials found in any village. The slingshot is not better than a rifle. It is different. And in guerrilla warfare, different is often more valuable than better. Richardson smiled. Private Santos just gave you a better explanation of asymmetric warfare than I got in 6 months at Fort Benning. Son, have you considered a military career after the war? No, sir. I'm going back to carpentry. That's a shame. You've got a gift for tactical innovation. The liberation of the Philippines was completed by July 1945. Japan surrendered in August. The war was over. The guerrilla units disbanded, their members returning to civilian life. Santos returned to San Vicente in September 1940, 4 months after his 19th birthday. The village had been damaged during the occupation, but was rebuilding. His parents had survived, though his father was emaciated from years of food shortages. Lao Chen, the carpenter who'd taught Santos his trade, had been killed by the Japanese in 1943 during a reprisal operation. Santos took over Chen's workshop. He rebuilt the business slowly, carefully, using the same methodical attention to detail that had made him a proficient slingshot operator. He never spoke about the war unless directly asked, and even then, his answers were brief and factual. In 1947, the Philippine government awarded Santos the Military Merit Medal for his service with the resistance. He attended the ceremony in Manila, wearing an ill-fitting borrowed suit, uncomfortable with the attention. When asked by a reporter what he thought his greatest contribution to the war effort had been, he replied, "I observed something others ignored. I practiced until the observation became useful. That's all." The slingshot itself, the original guava wood frame he'd carved in October 1944, remained in Santos's possession. He kept it in the workshop, hanging on the wall, occasionally showing it to visitors who asked about his military service. Years later, a historian researching unconventional warfare in the Philippines tried to acquire it for a museum. Santos politely declined. "It's not a museum piece," he explained. "It's a reminder that the most powerful weapon isn't always the one with the most firepower. Sometimes it's the one that makes you think differently about the problem." In the official military histories of the Philippine resistance, Santos received brief mention, usually a footnote about improvised weapons used by guerrilla forces. The slingshot program was described as a minor tactical innovation of limited strategic significance. But among the guerrilla fighters who'd been there, who'd witnessed the impossible made routine, who'd seen Japanese soldiers fall silently to carpenters' nails launched by rubber and wood, the story had a different weight. They told their children and grandchildren about the teenager who'd been mocked for playing with a toy weapon, who'd proven the skeptics wrong through nothing but observation and relentless practice, who'd turned dismissed foolishness into battlefield effectiveness. Corporal Domingo, who remained Santos's closest friend after the war, put it most simply during a reunion of resistance veterans in 1960. "We all thought Miguel was crazy. We laughed at him. We called him Tirador Boy, like it was an insult. Then we watched him drop a Japanese sergeant at 50 meters with a piece of wood and some rubber bands. And suddenly, we weren't laughing anymore. Suddenly, we were asking him to teach us. That's leadership. That's innovation. That's what wins wars that can't be won conventionally. Miguel Santos died in 1998 at age 72. He'd lived a quiet life as a respected carpenter in San Vicente, training apprentices in the same methodical techniques Lao Chen had taught him decades earlier. His obituary in the local newspaper mentioned his resistance service, but focused primarily on his craftsmanship, the boats he'd built, the houses he'd helped construct, the furniture he'd crafted. The slingshot was donated to the Philippine Military Museum after his death, per instructions in his will. It's displayed now in a small case in the unconventional warfare section, alongside a placard that reads, "Slingshot used by PFC Miguel Santos, Philippine Guerrilla Forces, 1944 to 1945. This improvised weapon, constructed from local materials, was used to eliminate enemy soldiers silently during resistance operations in northern Luzon. Santos trained approximately 50 guerrilla fighters in slingshot marksmanship, creating a tactical capability that conserved scarce ammunition while maintaining operational effectiveness." His innovation exemplifies the resourcefulness and ingenuity of Filipino resistance fighters during World War II. Most museum visitors walk past the display without much interest. A slingshot isn't dramatic like a rifle or a sword. It doesn't look impressive. It looks like something a child would make. But occasionally, someone stops, reads the placard, studies the simple Y-shaped frame, the rubber bands, the stabilizing cord wrapped around a sharpened nail, and understands. The best weapon isn't always the most powerful. Sometimes it's the one nobody expects, the one that requires you to see the battlefield differently, the one that turns conventional wisdom on its head. Miguel Santos understood that. He understood it at 18 years old, when everyone else thought he was wasting his time. He understood it through 3 months of solitary practice, through mockery and dismissal, through the terrifying moment in a spider hole at 3:47 a.m., when he had to trust his calculations against overwhelming skepticism. He was right. They were wrong. No one ever doubted him again.